Why don't we blow the system up? I mean, obviously we can't just turn off the spigot on the system we have and then say, hey, everyone in the world should get this new vaccine we haven't given to anyone yet.
So we really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
As the old adage goes, it is easier to fool the people than to convince them they have been fooled. There might not exist a more appropriate time for this point than right now. As you sit listening to my voice, your friends, co-workers, possibly family, are at odds, bickering, ghosting, threatening with violence or ostracism. A stark divide stands between us all, and the many commit social crimes against humanity in the name of things and ideas they do not understand nor can define or empirically prove exist. Hence the whole fool the people have become, and the fictional reality that screens, media personalities, politicians, influencers, and so-called experts have forced upon a society. There are two very successful ways to socially engineer a population. First is through the centralization of information deemed credible and truthful by a faction of experts. A ministry of truth of sorts must be erected and distributed far and wide by way of ubiquitous broadcasting systems. This can be considered narrative building and delivery. This process creates a false consensus or false sense of public opinion, which is meant to represent collectively a supported status quo ideal. Second, language stands as a type of magic that can turn a population into almost anything one wishes. There must be a redefining of terms, meaning of terms, and concepts must be fluid and ephemeral, gripping and powerful, ever-changing or interchangeable. But more importantly, the concept of repetition must drive the process. This idea is captured by the word used, iterative.
We really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
So if information control, whether that be meaning and or distribution of information, are prime aspects of shaping the public mind, modifying behavior of mass groups, or socially engineering a society, what is the essential purpose of such deception? Why are we wise to question the trustworthiness of our appointed saviors of public health and lords of epistemology? Could it be because lies, damn lies, and statistics make up the bulk of what we've been spoon-fed for what seems an eternity? Are we being purposely misguided towards an end not within our best interests? Are we being treated like a herd of animals opposed to individual souls created in the image of God? If we are being deceived, what is the purpose of such deception? This can be answered in one word: transition. A move, a directive, a change, a reset, if you will.
In order to make the transition from getting out of the tried and true egg growing, which we know gives us results that can be, beneficial. I mean, we've done well with that, to something that has to be much better. You have to prove that this works, and then you've got to go through all of the clinical trials, phase 1s, phase 2s, phase 3, and then show that this particular product is going to be good over a period of years. That alone, if it works perfectly, is going to take a decade.
The discovery of a new world, a new normal, a new earth, a new post-human being. This has been accomplished through the convincing of man that he is sickly, unsafe, and in need of indefinite care from his superiors. Under the guise of medicine and corporate-sponsored illness, mankind becomes beasts of the laboratory. The explorers are now an expert class of scientists and money changers, redefining Western expansion as digital global governance. The second manifest destiny is upon us. We are now confined, subdued, corralled into hives, motionless in the Middle Passage. In the bowels of massive ships we weep, as we stare at our limbs, clueless to how we have suddenly been enveloped by chains. The old world is the old system, and the new world is the new system. The transition will take time, pain, but more importantly, it will take convincing or force.
Phase 2, phase 3, and then show that this particular product is going to be good over a period of years. That alone, if it works perfectly, is going to take a decade.
Or possibly 18 months given the proper circumstances, or emergency status, or an entity of excitement, hence urgency for emergency.
There might be a need or even an urgent call for an entity of excitement out there that's completely disruptive, that's not beholden to bureaucratic strings and processes.
In other words, the transition requires a catalyst, a jumpstart as it were, the tried and true impetus of fear and crisis. The impending doom of external threats shapes the perfect hero and distressed damsel dynamic. Conflict and discomfort is created to prepare a need for security and intervention. We understand historically war or conflict has been the key driver of history. Pain seeks a healer. This way, the transition is not simply sped up, but justified, moral even. But next, there's the concept of information. And within the information age, knowledge and data represent currency and power. Unlike the industrial age that is oriented towards maximizing material output and economic growth, informationalism of the 21st century, according to sociologist Manuel Castells, is oriented towards technological development, that is towards an accumulation of knowledge and towards higher levels of complexity in information processing. The material goods and services of the motor-driven industrial age have been eclipsed by the microprocessing communication of the information age, where knowledge is not only power, but informs our shared reality. The marketplace is no longer physical, but virtual, and no longer is manufacturing material goods as important as the manufacturing of ideas. Perception truly is reality, hence the importance of information which shapes perception, which shapes reality. Social engineering is accomplished through the redefining of terms and selective distribution of information through strategic and sophisticated displays of embellishment and omission. Embellishing ideas, omitting others, but more importantly, centralizing idea production, hence this idea of within.
We really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
This is a perfect example of how a ministry of truth is structured to inform society regardless of personal conviction, relevance, rights, or truth. With no defined end in sight, the means need no justification. They are all that exist and make up the population's reality. Back to the term iterative. Repetition and enduring programming of the perception is required to standardize lies and uphold a house of cards. And of course, disruptive.
I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way.
In that you must stop all that you are doing, whom you are seeing, where you are going, and what you are planning to address this pressing and pertinent situation that is bigger than you, requiring your undivided attention, better, devotion. The seizure of action and thought, coupled with repetition of the main narrative, is a requirement. Yes, you do need both. How can such a universal surveillance medicine program under a new world biosecurity state foment the perfect catalyst through which mankind may transition into the fourth industrial age of informationalism? Rather easily, considering the nature of fear and advanced communication technology of 2021. Repeat the messaging and modeling whilst providing endless and ubiquitous imagery to reify the spectacle. They must not only hear it, but truly see it to believe it. This is easily accomplished by, yes, and of course, mystifying information through mass media, but also, and possibly more importantly, hearts and minds of men are seized readily to the harnessing of imagination via the power of symbol and visceral image. In his work The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, Gustave Le Bon sums this idea up with surgical accuracy. Whatever strikes the imagination of crowds presents itself under the shape of a startling and very clear image, freed from all accessory explanation or merely having a few marvelous or mysterious facts. Examples in point are the great victory, a great miracle, a great crime, or a great hope. Or for today, a modern take would be a great pandemic. He continues, things must be laid before the crowd as a whole, and their genesis must never be indicated. 100 petty crimes or petty incidents will not strike the imagination of crowds in the least, whereas a single great crime or a single great accident will profoundly impress them, even though the results be infinitely less disastrous than those of the 100 small accidents put together. To buttress his point, and for example, we could look at how people today seem to ignore the massive scale of death by other diseases, infectious and non-infectious, that make our so-called pandemic pale in comparison. Millions a year that die from hunger or the common flu do not register in the public mind because they do not have corporate state-funded image campaigns to establish them as worthy issues of public health concern. They have not been given buzzwords and thickening plots and events to construct narratives of mass social destruction. True believers are paradoxical in that they must see to believe, yet often what they believe they have truly never objectively witnessed or observed. The key is either to influence society such that it appeals to a common good or common ideal, or to convince individuals that their subjective beliefs and convictions are not only objectively moral, but akin to some unique aspect of their identity, an aspect that they foolishly believe they have formed on their own. Technocratic propaganda turns humanity into a unit to be experimented on, yet it also hijacks the individual self and conflates the state-defined common good with the needs of the subjective self. In effect, the objective and subjective become blurred, similar to the accompanying blur of truth and untruth, sick and healthy, etc. It operates on a macro and micro scale simultaneously, therefore influencing the herd through an aggregated process of deconstructing and reformatting the individual. With each and every individual influenced and altered via their mediated experience, the crowd, is formed as a result. As reality is constructed for them, or him or her, so are their ideas and perspectives, and even their individual identities. We see this via examples of identification through in-group membership, like the recent onset of Team Moderna or Team Pfizer rhetoric, double or triple jabbed as a marker of identity in online accounts. Social media ubiquity and platforms' managerial use of algorithms increases this fact. Therefore, the public mind becomes a product of a vacuum, and the average person becomes the representation of an idea. The crowd becomes the representation of an ideology, and civilization begins to look more like an arrangement of cults. This phenomena can be described by the socio-psychoanalysis of Raymond Barglow. He had described the development of the information age in contrast to prior eras as a maddening paradox. Mainly, he described the inconsistent relationship between group networking and the independent subject experience. As informationalism increases networking and integration of human action and communication, it paradoxically decreases the authenticity of the individual and the sovereignty of the personal and private. Self and object or group become enmeshed. Whilst the network society shrinks time and space, bringing the group together into a functional, intangible, unitary system, it violently subverts the traditional Western concept of a separate, unique, and independent self. The closer and more familiar we get as a group, the more alienated we are from our authentic selves. This dynamic is what psychology would call enmeshment, a sign of pathology. Given this type of pathology, self no longer defines the identity, yet forms a mere projected image and derivative expression of the group, an external locus of control. This is why truth, facts, or logical reasoning falls on deaf ears in the 21st century. Knowledge has increased to the degree that wisdom is no longer attainable, and guidance from a centralized power is the only route to civil stability and societal maintenance. Once the individual thinker is robbed of just deliberation and epistemological investigation, he is subject to mob rule and the authoritarianism of experts that exist beyond his pay grade. Shock, awe, and emotionalism become the vehicles by which the crowd is moved and subdued. Le Bon would agree, as he states, "It is not, then, the facts in themselves that strike the popular imagination, but the fact in which they take place and are brought under notice. It is necessary that by their condensation, if I may thus express myself, they should produce a startling image which fills and besets the mind. To know the art of impressing the imagination of crowds is to know at the same time the art of governing them." Hence spring 2020, whereby the great informational transition to the world biosecurity state began its era. Decades of design and strategy brought us all a feigned and orchestrated crisis and indefinite pandemic era set to define the years between 2020 and 2030. Create an unprecedented event that will call for desperate measures and stringent treatment that circumvents traditional bureaucracy and social systems, human rights, like bodily autonomy, for instance. Seize the opportunity to succeed in mandating draconian orders that have yet to have laws established as protection against such actions. Strike the public when vulnerable and without a shield to protect them. If they can print money from thin air, they can surely pull policy out of their ears, some would argue, from other places. Back to language, particularly meaning of language, and the authority a given person is qualified to exact when using that language. What do I mean? Like when speaking a foreign language in a foreign land, experience may be difficult, meaning communication and action are all contingent on one's ability to use language. So if one's ability to use the language of his land is limited, so are his experiences and degrees of understanding. What is important here is the idea that specialized language and intellectual concepts have dominated current public policy and confounded the public's conversation on objective reality. What is real and what is not real, or true or untrue, and the discussion on their relationships has recently been relegated to the annals of experts and technicians, specialists and fact-checking authorities. No longer can the public qualify to make decisive and informed judgments on their current moment, independent of cited sources and legacy media-linked data. We have become intellectually codependent and are no longer qualified to make judgments for ourselves, not even regarding our own bodies. The environment is not merely unsafe to live in, but unsafe to think in as well, apparently. If technocracy is defined by, and no longer government, but governance through a corporatist techno-specialist class and its systems of mechanism, then it would follow that its ministry of truth is defined by a specialized language its underclasses do not understand independently. With knowledge and communication being the pillars of informationalism, it would be wise on the part of those in power to create a form of monopoly on language and on meaning. Controlling information is to control perception of reality, making what Peter Drucker would have called the development of a post-industrial knowledge society ruled by specialists and information technicians, or Alvin Toffler's concept expressed in his work The Third Wave, the information society where computers control all that exists. Today, we refer to this idea as the data-driven economy in an age of automation. Possibly a prelude to this trajectory of data worship could be found in the work of Francis Bacon. In his piece, The Advancement of Learning, Bacon makes contentious references to the importance of organizing knowledge under a ruling king to wield an absolute form of power. He called for a state-funded scientific council of knowledge keepers that would guide nature and humanity as stewards of the earth. Knowledge seeking and knowledge managing as a pursuit of power. From his view on knowledge and a new scientific outlook on man and nature, the Royal Society was formed in 1662. From this point forward, the world would be approached as a scientific state, solidifying a separation of knowledge from ethics and its Christian foundations. Therefore, morality and faith took a backseat to the new and nascent marriage, knowledge and power, under the name science. They called it a scientific revolution or age of enlightenment. The secular state of scientific outlooks had formed, and hundreds of years later, an advanced version would surface. The biosecurity state of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Whether it data, information, or knowledge, the defining element of most salience is the esoteric nature of it, its acquired taste and academic parameters that keep it from the understanding of the laity, as if we are all illiterate peasants who do not understand Latin and must seek a priestly counsel to inform us on what is truth and how one should live. Now we have all been rendered childlike and are learning how to read for the first time. We are being indoctrinated with a new normal, and we are being taught a new language. The science, as it is called today, is handled like a set of government-issued flashcards in the hands of the public. The scientific method has been exchanged for platitudes and mantras, slogans, and assertions of false certainty, graphs and figures that make easy to look at pictures with colors and numbers. Numbers that, when explained by experts, tell you if something is a good thing or a bad thing. Their data and studies inform our consciences and tell us when we should be happy and when we should be afraid. Science, in this form, has become a meme, and believing in it with blind faith has become a sort of club or cult. Mystical and religious with a massive following of true believers. We have an outbreak of myopia, not respiratory illness. This is a result of limiting the understanding of the masses by confounding language and knowledge in a way that renders the general public brain dead and incompetent. Hence 2021's gaslighting politicians and knowledge products of self-appointed experts. It is a secret knowledge, a craft, or scientistic Gnosticism. Scientistic in that it is not empirically scientific, and essentially is a theoretical practice. And Gnostic in that it is built of acquired knowledge, specialized intellectual constructs of esoteric engineers and technicians funded by corporate state interests, pharmaceutical cartels, and foundation money. Their knowledge products have become standard curriculum in university systems, indoctrinating our youth and future generations, and echoed in mainline media network programming. This is how status quo perspective is manufactured, and mainline narratives are built by which public opinions are formed. There is image, there is symbol, and then there is the authority over language. Since 2020, our language has been dominated by studies and statistics that the average person does not understand. Speaking English and acting with a thinking brain no longer determines experience in America.
Evan McAleese and Sarah Lee.
To me, it is clear countries need to make strong efforts to manage both mis- and disinformation. We know social media companies are working around the clock to combat these disinformation campaigns. The task of identifying every bad actor is immense. And experts agree that new disinformation campaigns are being generated every day. This is a huge problem that's going to keep us from ending the pandemic and might even lead to the fall of governments, as we saw in the Arab Spring. If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice.
I agree with Kevin. This is a big problem and doesn't even account for the massive amounts of misinformation being generated by legitimate users about the pandemic. But it's not just trolls who are spreading the fake news. It's often political leaders themselves. Who's to judge what's real or not? Would we trust every government to separate truth from lies?
I think this is more than just keeping the bad information out. It's also about making sure real public health information reaches the public. News is found from outlets other than social media. News organizations, public health groups, and companies need to help people take the right actions to protect themselves by promoting accurate, real information about the outbreak.
Calls for change are getting louder.
What I want to see is action in this place.
Congress is weighing how to regulate social media. Whistleblower Frances Haugen Tuesday.
We can afford nothing less than full transparency.
Now it is the relinquishing of critical thinking and guidance of virology and epidemiology that determines one's experience in the once free society known as the United States. Virology and epidemiology, both unscientific, both non-empirical, are no more authentic sciences than continental philosophy is an authentic science, no more scientific than Mormonism or Santeria. If we were to be honest, given our current mass psychosis and public health gaffe, we could call our current medical dictatorship a form of a neo-mystery school religion, a literal faith-based medicine that claims to be science, yet is not scientific.
Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that.
Is science a man, person, place, or thing? A settled and objective matter that must go unquestioned? If anyone is to take the expert screed seriously, I think they would have to consider the utter mindlessness that seems to constantly drip from his leathery lips. As if there is not enough documentation of years building up to our present day that clearly demonstrates an incremental plan to usher in universal public health intervention of the compulsory type. By way of some glass palace on a hill housed scientific elite, much like, though to a more extreme and delusional degree, the consortium of scientists Francis Bacon spoke of in the 17th century. Even their own kooky futurists speak directly against this madness we are now witnessing from our so-called expert class.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along.
Indeed, questioning science so-called, questioning methodology, data, conclusions, etc., is the very definition of science. But what we will discover is that no, what we are experiencing is not science at all. It is a course of deceptive transition being rolled out under the guise of science and public health. It is about the personality and authority of the message giver that is important, not the message, nor the validity, accuracy, relevance, or truth of the message. How, you might ask? Where is the proof? Even when the science is proven wrong or inadequate, biosecurity state authoritarianism simply doubles down.
The controversy since the virus started include the botched testing at the beginning, no research on masks for children in primary care, the J&J pause, the controversy over the use or non-use of ivermectin, and there was no study yet completed. Dr. Collins told me it's not done yet. The no discussion of natural immunity, which exists and ought to be out there. The discussion of herd immunity, which is switched back and forth. The mask discussion at the beginning, don't wear masks, the noble lie, and then wear masks. Now, equity issues in the FDA panel scientific discussion. I've lost confidence in the CDC and the FDA. And I actually believe a lot of Americans, a significant part of America, now have lost confidence in you, Dr. Fauci. Is there a point where you will say, I do more harm than good because people don't listen to me anymore, and step aside?
No, absolutely, unequivocally no, Hugh. No.
Look, I don't know who you are, what you are, where you came from. And I'm not taking any more of this. You get the hell out of here before I throw you out.
No, absolutely, unequivocally no.